When it comes to a class picking guide, you really should just pick the class that resonates with you the most. That could be because of class fantasy or the role that you want to fill. Don't look at tier list videos telling you which class is going to be the best, because ultimately, no one knows. We're working with a very small portion of a much, much larger game. With level 25 being the cap in Season of Discovery, what is really powerful now could be incredibly weak at max level. So the best way to decide what class you want to play right now is think about what role you want to fill in raids or even in dungeons. Listen to all the information in this video so you know what each class is looking like it's going to shape up to be, and then make a decision. Over the last 2 weeks, I've covered every class in their own individual videos. Since those videos have been posted, there's been updates from Blizzard regarding slight changes to abilities or coefficients, and we just have a much better understanding from doing deep dives on podcasts and things like that. So this video will be actually a lot more accurate than all the individual videos were, so sit back, relax, and strap yourself in for quite a long one. First up, the Warrior. I would say the Warrior is one of the most played classes in Vanilla WoW, and for good reason. They're not only a lot of fun, but they really are just crazy in terms of output as well. Throw in the fact that you can literally tank by almost feeling like your primary objective is just to do as much damage as possible, and you have the recipe for absolute success. Or absolute class stacking, but either way, it's still a lot of fun. The question is, have Blizzard took all their learnings from the last 20 years and realised that Warriors truly are the top dogs of Vanilla and brought them in line with the other classes, or more to the point, raised all the other classes and specs up to the Warriors level? No, of course they haven't. Warrior's still absolutely going to be broken. I genuinely believe just by looking at these runes, Warrior is looking even more insane than it was before, and I do really believe by the time we reach level 60 and start working on that kind of end game, they're going to absolutely destroy anything in their path. Now, we know part of why Warrior is so ridiculously strong is because of how they scowl. And while at lower levels they might not be the absolute god tier DPS that you're going to be at level 60, I still think you're going to have a great time on a Warrior all the way up to level 60 through all of these different level brackets. So 25, then 40, then 50, and obviously finally 60. And this is thanks to some of the crazy runes that they get, and actually your choice of runes is so cool that there's going to be situations where you'll likely use the vast majority of them either during a raid or when you're leveling, or even if you're just doing dungeons. So firstly, the glove runes, and I've got to be honest, the choices are absolutely bonkers. This is actually one of the things that draws me to a Warrior more than I've ever been drawn to a Warrior before. I really do like options, and I like the fact that some of these runes can be used in different situations, but starting with Devastate, which obviously is going to be your tanking rune. Devastate is nothing new, however, working like this, it absolutely is. So while you're in defensive stance and you have a shield equipped, Sunder Armor will also deal 100% weapon damage, increased by 10% per application of Sunder Armor already on the target. So you're not actually getting Devastate as such, it is actually just modifying the way Sunder Armor works. So when you've got it stacked 5 times, you're going to be doing 150% weapon damage just by further pressing Sunder Armor. In the protection tree through talents, you can reduce the rage cost of Sunder, bringing it down to 12 rage. So when this is stacked, you're getting 150% weapon damage for just 12 rage on an ability that already baseline causes a high amount of threat. It's going to be absolutely crazy for you prot warriors. I'd say more so at later game, because at 25, even if you dumped every talent point into protection, you're only going to be able to get 1 point into improved Sunder. Next up, we've got Endless Rage, and quite honestly, there's not a lot to say here. You generate 25% more rage from all damage you deal. Having more rage means more abilities that you can press. Unfortunately, if you're trying to prepare for the level 25 bracket, so as in phase 1, you've not got a ridiculous amount of buttons that you can press anyway. So actually the next rune is super powerful, because it's Quick Strike. And what Quick Strike is a reckless instant melee attack with your two-handed weapon dealing X amount of damage based on your attack power, so this will scale as you obviously become more powerful and get more gear. Doing physical damage, of course, and this ability benefits from and triggers all effects associated with Heroic Strike, which is actually a very important part of this ability because it costs 20 rage. Very early on, you could reduce this down to 17 rage by reducing the cost of Heroic Strike abilities by 1 rage point, and it gives you an extra rage spender because there's going to be times where, as we look at other runes, where you might be pooling rage. So you're waiting for a specific amount of rage, and then you're going to start pumping. So actually being able to have Quick Strike, which is no doubt going to proc from Wind Fury. So ordinarily in Vanilla, because you're trying to get extra attacks as a warrior for more chances to proc Wind Fury, you would be using something like Hamstring because it's super cheap. It does 0 damage, but obviously it's very cheap. It's like 10 rage. So now having something to spend rage on that is actually going to do damage as well as proc Wind Fury is going to be absolutely insane. Obviously, this does require a two-handed weapon, which means you would have options in whether you wanted to go down in arms or you wanted to go down into fury. Overall, I think quick strike's going to be absolutely amazing, and I think most people that want a big two-handed weapon are going to be using it. But the next one up I absolutely love, and it's single-minded fury. It's an extremely basic rune that we don't need to spend a great deal of time talking about, but while dual wielding, your physical damage and movement speed are increased by 10%. So getting the extra physical damage while you're dual wielding is great, but think about it. If this is a rune that you actually pick up quite early, let's say by, I don't know, level 6 or even level 10, we know how painful it's going to be just walking around everywhere and not having a mount. So getting that 10% movement speed would actually be massive. And there's a lot of runes that obviously will work alongside this, but I still think two-handed is the way to go, if I'm completely honest, as in if we're talking at level 25. But I think while leveling, single-minded fury could be actually very good. It's just the next rune that makes that a difficult choice, which is Victory Rush. And if any of you have actually used this version of Victory Rush before, where it heals you when you use it, it's absolutely insane for leveling. Honestly, out of all of these runes, no matter how good Quick Strike ends up being, no matter how fun it is to use Single-Minded Fury, or even if I wanted to level as Protection, I wouldn't even be tempted by Devastate, because Victory Rush just keeps you pumping. When you're out questing, after every kill, you're going to have this available for the next target that you charge into, because it only has an 8-second cooldown, and it heals you for 10% of your maximum health. Honestly, if you're soloing, if you're just like, solo questing all the way to 25, and you get hold of this, I wouldn't use any of the others. Genuinely, I would go Victory Rush all in for leveling. And then I'd probably go two-handed with Quick Strike at level 25. And honestly, I think it's just because of how it's going to actually interact with Wind Fury that's going to make it exceptionally powerful. Not to say that the other options aren't great though. 25% more Rage could work for you, and Single-Minded Fury, if you really like dual wield, absolutely could work as well. And Devastate, if you're going to be Protection, it's kind of a no-brainer. Unless you're going to two-handed tank, which I could see happening. In which case, even if you were two-handed tanking, you might use Quick Strike. Moving on to the chest runes. First up, we've got Blood Frenzy, where each time you deal bleed damage, you gain 3 Rage. Now, whilst this doesn't sound overly impressive, if you was to go down into the arms tree and pick up Improved Rend, that's not really what we're actually after, but it's leading on to Deep Wounds, where your critical strikes cause the opponent to bleed over 12 seconds. So you're going to have Rend up, and you're going to have Deep Wounds up, ticking every few seconds, and you're going to be getting 3 Rage from every one of those ticks. So actually, it is a lot of Rage that you'd be gaining if you was to take Blood Frenzy. It's not actually as bad as it sounds. Unfortunately, the problem is when you've got something like Flagellation, it makes the decision pretty easy that you're probably not going to use Blood Frenzy. Because what Flagellation does is you gain a 25% bonus to physical damage done for 12 seconds after activating Blood Rage or Berserker Rage. Now, like you can see here, this is everything you're going to have at level 25. Unfortunately, Blood Rage is the only one you're going to have that's on a 1-minute cooldown. Now, don't get me wrong, 25% damage for 12 seconds on a 1-minute cooldown is an absolutely bonkers personal cooldown to be using, for a DPS output cooldown. And it's going to get even better in later game when you get access to Berserker Rage, which comes at level 32 and only has a 30-second cooldown. Now, yes, you'll have to go into Berserker stance to use this, but it's only a 30-second cooldown, and the buff for the 25% damage is going to last 12 seconds. And then you've got Blood Rage as well, and that's a lot of uptime, which is why I said no matter how good any of these other ones are, Flagellation, if it doesn't change, is pretty much just going to be the go-to chest rune for every warrior. In my opinion, including tanks, because if we cover what you could consider as the tank rune next, it would be Warbringer. I consider Warbringer more of a PvP rune, but don't get me wrong, as a tank, I see the power of being able to charge in combat, to pick ads up, to pick the boss up, to go out and do something else and then very quickly charge back to maybe in a taunt rotation to take it off your off tank or whatever. But your charge, intercept and intervene abilities are now usable while in combat and in any stance, and will remove movement impairing effects when activated. So it's extremely strong. For PvP, for PvE, for absolutely everything. When you put in Flagellation in the mix against this, it's hard to say that any of these other chest runes would be worth using. Is it just me? Tell me in the comments. Is Flagellation just too strong? Maybe not in phase 1 at 25 when it's on a 1-minute cooldown just attached to Blood Rage, but once you get Berserker Rage, that's absolutely nuts. But Warbringer still will have its place, and quite honestly, in PvP, it probably would be tough to decide between the 25% damage or being able to charge and remove all your roots and everything. And then finally, Raging Blow. So firstly, it's a ferocious strike that deals 100% weapon damage, but can only be used while in Rage, Berserker Rage, or Blood Rage is active. Now, if you're using Consumed by Rage, this should count as an enrage effect, as many warriors told me in the comments of the actual warrior video that went out last week, so you should be able to use Raging Blow almost on cooldown. But you're like, wait, what about when you're enraged? Okay, so if we look at that, if you're not familiar with vanilla and you've been playing things like Wrath of the Lich King, you've probably forgot that Enrage only procs when you're the victim of a critical strike. So if you're in a PvE encounter and you're DPSing as Fury, you need something hitting you and hopefully critting you, so you're actually going to be able to get Enrage up. And if we get rid of some of these talents, you can see at level 25, you'd only be able to get 1 point in it anyway. So you're having to go very deep in Fury, possibly ignoring other important talents, just to be able to get a 5% damage bonus for 12 seconds on the off chance you're a victim of a critical strike. Now, don't get me wrong, Enrage is an absolute must in PvP, but are you really going to go for Raging Blow in PvP? Probably not. Overall, though, the chest runes, I think Flagellation just blows everything out of the water to the point where it would be very difficult for me to actually want to even discover any other runes if I already had Flagellation. And then finally, moving us on to the legs, and these will be very quick because, honestly, they're actually quite boring. And let's start with the most boring, Furious Thunder. Thunderclap now increases the time between attacks by an additional 6% and can be used in any stance. Cool. Even though I said Furious Thunder was boring, in a recent little hotfix, they have actually increased the threat of it when you're using this rune by 50% as well. I really have got nothing else to say about it. I mean, Thunderclap's great, but again, when we look at one of these other runes, it's going to be very difficult for you to ever want to even discover Furious Thunder. Frenzied Assault is for the two-handed enjoyers, and while wielding two-handed weapons, your attack speed is increased by 20%. I mean, that's cool, and that could be a real good option, but it is going up against one of the most powerful runes in the game, which is the final one, Consumed by Rage. Warriors Consumed by Rage enrages you and grants you a 20% melee damage bonus for 12 seconds, up to a maximum of 12 swings after you exceed 80 rage. This was actually 25% up until the recent little fixes that have gone out before launch. Now, while it's early days, and this could absolutely end up with an internal cooldown of sorts, or a 30-second cooldown, let's say, so you can't just proc it back to back. Without a cooldown, it's absolutely nuts. And if you pair this with Flagellation, where with Consumed by Rage, you wait until you get over 80 rage, and then you force Flagellation to proc by using Blood Rage. And the thing is, even from level 1, it doesn't take that long to get to 80 rage. You'll get to 80 rage on one mob, ready on the next mob. You know, that's talking if you was out grinding using this, because quite honestly, I don't see the point of using any of the other runes at all on the legs. It would literally just be Consumed by Rage for every single person that's a warrior. Because, honestly, even the two-handed weapons increasing your attack speed by 20%, even if I was using a two-handed weapon, I'd still be going for Consumed by Rage. And now we have the Warlock. The Warlock in Season of Discovery looks like it's shaping up to be something pretty special. Going from the Shadow Bolt spam in Turret in Classic era to now in Season of Discovery, having multiple options in terms of how you'll deal damage, be it primarily with Shadow spells or primarily with Fire spells. And you're even now going to have the ability to tank. Now they've got dedicated tank runes that actually make them pretty mental. And looking at it just in its phase 1 state, I see it as a legit option as a primary tank in all fights. The choice of what rune combinations you can run as a Warlock is actually incredibly interesting and really varied, and like I've said with many of the other classes, the ones I really like the look of in Season of Discovery are the ones where it's hard to decide between multiple runes in a single slot. And Warlock is definitely one of those, where actually the runes synergize together really, really well, and it might not be as obvious which ones to use as it might seem when you first look. We're going to look at all the runes that you're going to get as a Warlock, and there's 12 in total spread across the chest, legs, and gloves. Starting with the glove runes, first of all, we've got Chaos Bolt, which sends a bolt of chaotic fire at the enemy, dealing X amount of damage, and this is fire damage, of course. Chaos Bolt always hits, cannot be resisted, and its knowledge causes all your fire spells to pierce through absorption effects. Now, this additional little bit that they've chucked on is quite interesting, because later on in the expansions, actually you could further increase the amount of damage Chaos Bolt does based on your critical strike. They've gone down a different route with it this time, but actually, I really like it. So now all of your fire spells are going to pierce through absorption effects, not just Chaos Bolt itself. This doesn't mean that they're always going to hit. An absorption effect, for example, would be a Priest Power Word Shield. If you're pumping Searing Pain, Incinerate, Immolation, whatever into them, just because you've got Chaos Bolt on your gloves they'll go through those shields. It's fairly needless to say that if you're going to play a fire DPS Warlock, Chaos Bolt is absolutely going to be the one that you go for. Next up, we've got Haunt, and just like Chaos Bolt, we're all probably very familiar with Haunt, but it unleashes a ghostly soul on an enemy, dealing damage and increasing all shadow damage over time you deal to that target by 20%. When the Haunt ends or is dispelled, you'll be healed for all the damage it dealt to your target. Now, it kind of goes without saying that Haunt is going to be the choice if you're going to be a shadow DPS Warlock. This will be increasing the amount of damage from things like your Curse of Agony or even your Corruption, and it also means you haven't got to worry as much when you're life tapping to get mana back, because you know Haunt, when it expires, is going to heal you anyway. Overall, Haunt is really good. I'm not sure at lower levels, so in the first bracket, as in phase 1, where we can get to 25, I feel like Fire looks a bit stronger, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. Next up, a nice little AoE ability, which is Shadow Bolt Volley. Now, this just alters the way your actual Shadow Bolt ability works, where your Shadow Bolt is normally just a single target. Now, Shadow Bolt will strike up to 5 targets within a chain distance of 10 yards, but for 20% reduced damage. So on trash in dungeons or even in raids at later levels, if you're not a tank, Shadow Bolt Volley, acting a bit like a chain lightning effect, is going to be super strong. There'll also be certain bosses, even in raids at later levels, where there'll be so many adds that are stacked up that Shadow Bolt Volley could actually be very useful there. But thinking about phase 1 in particular, having something like this when you're smashing through either BFD or even dungeons trying to get some gear for level 25 is going to be pretty insane. And remember, you only have to be out of combat to change these runes. So Shadow Bolt Volley on trash, Haunt or Chaos Bolt on everything else. And then finally the big one, which you're all going to be loving if you're wanting to tank, Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis transfers you into a demon, so it is basically the same looking demon as Metamorphosis in future expansions, but it increases your armor by 500%, reducing the chance you'll be critically hit by 6%, it increases your threat by 50%, increasing mana gained from life tap by 100%, and transforming the functionality of some of your abilities and granting some new abilities. Now, Metamorphosis works exactly the same as a shapeshift would for a Druid. So there's no cooldown, there's nothing like that. You can pop freely between Metamorphosis form, so your demon form, and then back to your normal form. So if you was thinking, oh great, you can tank every 30 seconds. No, like this is a permanent effect as long as you've got it toggled on. And then what it actually does for your effects is Searing Pain will become instant cast. Shadow Bolt becomes a Shadow Cleave, which is a shadow melee attack that hits up to 3 nearby enemies and has a 6-second cooldown, and that will synergize really well with another rune, which we'll get to soon. Curse of Recklessness now also taunts your target to attack you for 3 seconds, but gains a 10-second cooldown, and the range is reduced to melee. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel like they could have picked a better curse to attach it to. There's nothing wrong with it, it's great, don't get me wrong, but I think they could have put it on like Curse of Weakness, for example, because that would be something that you'd actually want to use as a tank anyway. And on the basis it'll have a 10-second cooldown, you'll not only be using it as a taunt when you need to, but you'll also be applying a damage reduction that the boss or the trash or whatever you actually put it on, you know, that they would actually be dealing to you, rather than actually increasing the amount of damage they're going to do once you've taunted them, but it does reduce their armor. So it's still a DPS game for people, but I don't know, I'd probably put it on Weakness over Recklessness. Tell me in the comments what one you think it belongs on. You're going to get Demon Charge as well, which you charge an enemy and stun it for 1 second. This cannot be used in combat, so this is basically how you're going to start a fight. And then finally you get Demonic Hell, which forces all nearby enemies to focus attacks on you for 6 seconds. Now, what I would say about this is it is a really powerful rune. I mean, that goes without saying. It needs to be a powerful rune to enable a cloth wearer to actually tank, you know, legitimately on all bosses, on all trash, be able to do all the content. But because it's so powerful, it really does mean you can be flexible with your chest and leg runes. So we might as well go with the chest runes next. Now, first up, you've got Demonic Tactics, which, don't get me wrong, it looks a bit boring, but what you do need to think about is the low levels of crit that you're actually going to be having, especially in phase 1. So what this does is increases the melee and spell critical strike chance of you and your pet by 10%. Now, there'll be more relevance to that rune when we actually get to the legs, so we'll just skip past that one for now, and if you want 10% crit, you can put it on your chest. Next up, we've got an amazing one if you're wanting to do fire DPS, which is called Lake of Fire. Rain of Fire also leaves a lake of fire on the ground that increases all fire damage you deal and your demon pet deals to affected enemies by 40% for 15 seconds. 40% extra fire damage. That's 40% extra damage on Chaos Bolt. And that's not even where it ends, because we can get even more than 40% on other runes. I can see this being used for single target. You'd pop a little Rain of Fire down on the boss, stop channeling to actually start doing a rotation, as in things like Chaos Bolt, Incinerate, Immolate, and then as soon as that 15 seconds runs out, so you've not got the 40% anymore, You just pop another couple of ticks down of Rain of Fire and you crack on. You're going to be heavily reliant on the tank not moving out of it though, because that will be super annoying, and I already see that happening before it's even launched. Next up, we've got Master Channeler. Your drain life is no longer channeled. It lasts 15 seconds with a 15-second cooldown. It costs 100% more mana and heals you for 50% more each time it deals damage. Now, there's a couple of things about this. Straight away, it screams tank, and absolutely, as a tank, you would be using Metamorphosis on your gloves, you'd be using Master Channeler on your chest, and then we'll get to the legs in a minute. But this means you use it once and you're constantly healing. And it doesn't matter that it's costing more mana because of how Metamorphosis works, because you're gaining 100% extra mana from life tap. When you life tap, you've got Master Channeler already on the boss, so you instantly start healing for the damage that you've just took by life tapping. So life tap and this obviously synergize together incredibly well if you tank him. But as I say, this is another rune that synergizes incredibly well with a leg rune as well. Next up, quite a boring one because you're probably very familiar with it anyway, and it's Soul Siphon, which increases the amount drained by your drain life and drain soul spells by an additional 6% for each of your Warlock shadow effects inflicting the target, and this is up to a maximum of 18% additional effect. Now, Soul Siphon sounds very good, and you might want to use it, but me personally, if I was Shadow, I'd be using Master Channeler, and the reason I'd be using Master Channeler is because not only is it another dot, but like I say, it synergizes incredibly well with a leg rune that we'll go and talk about now. Everlasting Affliction, where your Drain Life, Drain Soul, Shadow Bolt, Shadow Cleave, Searing Pain, Incinerate, and Haunt refresh the duration of your corruption on the target back to its maximum duration. So if you go Master Channeler on your chest rune, so you've got constant ticks of Drain Life going on, it's going to be constantly refreshing corruption anyway. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're going Shadow DPS, Shadow Bolt and Haunt are going to be refreshing corruption anyway. But like I say, Master Channeler makes it an extra dot. So you're going to have Drain Life constantly ticking, Corruption, Curse of Agony, you're going to have Haunt on the target anyway. I mean, it's going to be pretty sick. Now, this in particular is also the rune I wanted to talk about in terms of tanking. Even though for tanking, you're most likely going to take Incinerate, maybe even Demonic Pact, or maybe even Demonic Grace if you need the cooldown, your Shadow Cleave also refreshes Corruption to its maximum duration. So as a Warlock tank, if you've got 5 points in improved Corruption, which then makes Corruption instant cast, and you're tanking trash, you could put Corruption on 3 mobs, and you know every time you use Shadow Cleave on cooldown, it's going to refresh that dot on all 3 of them, which I'm not saying that is going to be the go-to way, but I love the way that that actually does synergize really well, even if you're a tank. While we're talking about tanking, we might as well cover Demonic Grace, because this really is the one that's meant to be used for tanks. It causes you to surge with fell energy, increasing your pets and your own dodge chance by 30%, and your chance to critically strike with all attacks by 30%. Now, it only lasts 6 seconds, but it is only on a 20-second cooldown as well. So you can use this when you know there's big predictable swings coming in from a boss. Or where I see it being super useful would be actually on the pull. You know, so as soon as you charge in, bang, use this. You got 30% extra crit for those 6 seconds as well. So you're going to be able to get some big burst threat out on the pull. So it definitely has its place, but if you don't need that dodge chance, I feel like Incinerate for tanking could be really, really good. Because you most likely think that this is actually purely for a fire DPS Warlock, which you're kind of right, but it burns the enemy for X amount of fire damage and increases all fire damage you deal by 25% for the next 15 seconds. Now, if you think about Metamorphosis, Metamorphosis makes Searing Pain instant cast. Searing Pain causes fire damage, you're going to be able to literally spam it as a single target ability, and it causes a high amount of threat. This will be your go-to single target threat builder, and if you now add 25% extra damage onto it, yes, Incinerate you're going to have to hard cast once every 15 seconds, but I think for actually threat-sensitive fights, or, you know, when you're just trying to put out as much damage as a tank as possible, this could actually be pretty insane. But like I said at the start, this is what makes me excited about Warlock tanks, because actually all 4 of these leg runes are viable, because the one we haven't spoke about is Demonic Pact, and Demonic Pact is as you would expect from Wrath of the Lich King. Your pet's critical strikes apply the Demonic Pact effect to your party members for 45 seconds, which increases spell damage and healing by 10% of your spell damage, or your level divided by 2, whichever is higher. This doesn't work on subjugated demons, which is absolutely fine. So when you look at these 4, you could run Demonic Grace if you need the extra threat on the pull and you need the 30% dodge chance. You could run Demonic Pact if you wanted to be buffing the group. What you've got to remember, though, is without using some of the other runes to actually get more crit. So this is where the chest rune comes in. With Demonic Tactics, increases the melee and spell critical strike chance of you and your pets by 10%. The uptime on Demonic Pact, it could be a bit of a nightmare for it to actually proc that first time. Of course, it's still going to proc anyway, and there's no actual DPS Warlock spec that's going to want to bring this. They're either going to want to be Fire DPS using Incinerate, or they're going to want to be Shadow DPS using Everlasting Affliction. Good luck trying to get a non-Warlock tank to bring Demonic Pact, which is why I think actually for a lot of occasions Demonic Pact on the tank is a good idea. But then you do have the option of multi-dotting and keeping them up with Shadow Cleave, and as I said before, Incinerate just for single target threat would be pretty mental as well. I mean, overall you can see how powerful the Warlock's going to be and the options that you've got. The big boy Shaman. Shaman in Season of Discovery is one that I'm really excited to talk about. In fact, it's one that I really didn't expect to be quite as excited about. With Shamans already having the ability to DPS and heal, the thought of them ever getting an actual tanking spec was something I didn't think would ever happen. But for the longest time in Vanilla WoW, Shamans have had some good defensive talents like shield specialization, for example, where with 5 points it increases your chance to block attacks with a shield by 5%, and increases the amount blocked by 25%, as well as 5% dodge from anticipation. We know it's been a long time tradition for people to try and tank effectively and efficiently on an enhancement shaman, but now you can actually do it. Let's go through all of the glove runes first. So first of all, you're going to get Lava Burst, where you hurl molten lava at the target, dealing 198 to 256 fire damage, and if your Flame Shock is on the target, Lava Burst will deal a critical strike. That is definitely for those Ellie enjoyers, and to most of us that have played more than just vanilla, it's nothing new. For the enhancement shamans, you're going to get Lava Lash, where you charge your offhand weapon with lava, instantly dealing 100% offhand weapon damage, and damage is increased by 20% if your offhand weapon is enchanted with Flame Tongue. Instantly, you're like, offhand weapon as a shaman? We use two-handed weapons in vanilla. Well, you'd be right. Even looking through the talents, we know Weapon Mastery increases the damage you deal with all weapons. You get Storm Strike. You get two-handed axes and maces, so it allows you to use big two-handed weapons, but there's nowhere where you get Dual Wield. Dual Wield wasn't actually added until 2.0.1, and it was a talent. And it was a talent all the way up until Mr. Pandaria, where then it became a passive ability. Now, on the basis it's not added as a rune, it's not added as a talent, it looks like you're going to get it as a passive ability, and it's only about 5 expansions early, so cool. The reason I say it's added as a passive because there's a lot of confusion over Dual Wield Specialization, which is a chest rune, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But next up on the gloves, you get Molten Blast, which is the first introduction of an actual tanking rune for the Shaman. But when you read this, you can do more than tank with it. It blasts enemies in a cone in front of you for 39 to 54 fire damage. This ability generates a high amount of threat, and Flame Shock periodic damage has a 10% chance to reset the cooldown on it. So as you can imagine, even as leveling as enhancement normally, this could be more valuable than Lava Lash, because Lava Lash always has, and probably will be in Season of Discovery, a little bit lackluster. So the ability to use a conal attack and its cooldown is reset even while you're just out soloing gives you a lot of options. This is why I really like the state Shaman looks like it's going to be in Season of Discovery, because none of these are set in stone. There is actually a lot of options. As a shaman who's going to be tanking, you would imagine Molten Blast is going to be your bread and butter. And then finally, Water Shield. We're all familiar with Water Shield from future expansions, but you're surrounded by 3 globes, granting 1% of your max mana every 5 seconds. When a spell, melee, or ranged attack hits the caster, 4% of the max mana is restored to the caster. This expends a water globe, and only 1 globe can be activated every few seconds. Again, you're instantly looking at that thinking, oh great, well that's how Resto Shaman glove rune straight away. That's what you're going to always use. As a Resto Shaman, I agree, you're always going to use it. But there is a world where you could use that as Ellie. If you was using it as Ellie just to keep your mana up all the time and you're not using Lava Burst, you're just going to be using Lightning Bolt instead, keeping shock up, for example, it could be a really good way to reduce the amount of downtime between pulls while you're leveling to 25. Again, this is what I actually love about the Shaman runes. All of these have got a place, no matter what spec you play. Moving on to chest runes, because I alluded to the Dual Wield Specialization rune already. What this actually does is increases your chance to hit with both spells and melee attacks by 5% while dual wielding, and your Storm Strike ability now hits with both weapons. So this is assuming that you can already use dual wield. It's not this rune that actually enables you to use dual wield. And the other interesting thing about this talent is you're getting that 5% hit for spells and melee, which is great. Obviously, there's like 5% hit is absolutely amazing. But what you got to remember in phase 1 is you're not going to have Storm Strike. You don't get that until level 40 because that's at the bottom of the enhancement tree. So for this rune, you are literally only gaining the 5% hit, which could make your decisions a little bit more difficult. But let's find out. Next up for Resto Shamans, and I would say exclusively Resto Shamans, would be Healing Rain. Healing Rain doesn't look like it's going to work the same in Season of Discovery as it does in future expansions, because what it actually does here is it selects an area 15 yards around the target player and heals all of the target player's party members within that area for 20 seconds. Now, Healing Rain in future expansions, where it gets introduced in Cataclysm, actually is just a ground AoE. You don't target it on a player, you just put a ground AoE down on the floor and everybody who stands in it gets healed. This is only party-wide, so you're going to put it on an individual and it looks like everyone who's in that player's party around them will get the heal over 20 seconds. It looks like it is only going to be party-wide going by the tooltip, and the people will need to be stood in that area for the whole 20 seconds to basically get the healing. Next up is Overload, and Overload is absolutely amazing now because, again, it's not only for Ellie Shamans. It gives you a Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Chain Heal, Healing Wave, and Lava Burst, a 33% chance to cast a second similar spell on the same target at no additional cost, for half of their damage or healing and 0 threat. Wow. I mean, for Resto Shamans, chain healing and getting Overload procs, that's going to be crazy. And the fact that it works on Lava Burst as well, obviously Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning we expect, but I love the fact that this has actually been made into a healing rune as well. So you've got a choice between this and Healing Rain. Now, if Healing Rain requires your party to stand in that rune, I would say Overload is the go-to healing talent, as well as, at the moment, it's looking like the go-to elemental talent. And then finally, Shield Mastery, where there's not really any way around this. This is your tanking rune for your chest. Shield Mastery actually now increases your mana by 8%, not 4%. This was just another minor change in the latest patch notes. And you gain armor equal to 30% of your shield's armor value, stacking up to 5 times. You also always gain 10% increased chance to block and 15% increased block value. Now, of course, to keep your mana up, it's increasing your armor, it's increasing your block. Like, it's a no-brainer that as a Shaman tank, you're going to be using this. And now moving on to the leg runes. Again, these are absolutely huge. Ancestral Guidance looks like it's going to be a really powerful cooldown. I believe it's a couple of minute cooldown, but for the next 10 seconds, 25% of your damage is converted to healing on up to 3 nearby party members, and then 100% of that healing that you've just done is then converted to damage on your most recent Flame Shock target. Just extra damage and you're helping heal. Now, it's nearby party members, so positioning is going to be important when you use this, but it's worth noting when it said damage on your most recent Flame Shock target. So you do need to make sure that you've got Flame Shock on the mob that you actually want benefiting from this extra damage. You know, if you've just had Flame Shock on an ad that's just about to die, you pop this and start nuking the boss, obviously you might miss out on some of this damage. So using it in the right way is going to be important. Earth Shield is going to be pretty much the go-to resto leg rune here because it protects the caster with an earthen shield, reducing casting or channeling time lost when damaged by 30%, and causes attacks to heal the shielded target by 100. This effect only occurs once every few seconds and it's got 3 charges. You can only keep this on one person at a time, and that one person is generally the tank. Now, Earth Shield is nothing new to us. We've seen Earth Shield in loads of expansions, so when we actually start looking at the last 2 runes, you'll see that as a Resto Shaman, this is probably the one you're going to use. I don't see an occasion where you would use this as an Enhancement Shaman or even an Ellie Shaman, but that'll be made obvious when we look at the next 2. Shamanistic Rage has been changed, and for the better. So we know this is a future talent that comes in the game like most of these, or all of them in fact. Shamanistic Rage reduces all damage you take by 20% and you regenerate mana every second for 15 seconds. Mana regenerated per second is equal to 15% of your attack power, 10% of your spell power, or 6% of your healing, whichever value is greatest. The good thing that they've done with Shamanistic Rage is they've added it so your party members within 40 yards will also receive 10% of the mana you receive this way. So this can actually be an absolutely amazing rune if you're in a group full of casters, no matter what spec Shaman you are. So this is really cool that they took a future enhancement talent which was meant to alleviate enhancement mana problems and then made it work for Resto and Elemental. So no matter what Shaman spec you are, you can make really good use of this. But don't sleep on the damage reduction portion. You know, the fact that you can use it as a personal cooldown at a time you also need mana. And then finally, Way of Earth. this is only going to be used by tanking shamans. While Rockbiter weapon is active on your main hand weapon, you do an increased threat, gain 30% increased health, take 10% reduced damage, and you gain 6% reduced chance to be critically hit by melee attacks. So basically, this is making you crit immune. And then finally, Earth Shock taunts targets to attack you and has a separate cooldown from other shock spells, but has its range reduced to melee range. Any of these tanks that have got ranged abilities by, like, standard, they end up becoming a melee ability as a taunt. But that's really cool. I mean, you can see why I'm excited about Shaman now. There is so many options, and I think they're going to be top tier levelers. A stealthy little rogue. The rogue is another fan favourite in vanilla. In fact, a favourite of WoW as a whole. Great utility, survivability, 3 specs that all have their place and absolutely bring solid damage to any encounter. You know what every rogue has complained about though since 2004, right? They've always said they wanted to be main tanks. Hang on. They didn't say that? Wait, no, you're right. No one has ever complained about that. Well, who cares? They can do it now anyway. Yes, you heard that right. Rogues will be able to tank, and it actually looks like a really unique way of tanking as well, because the closest thing you could really compare this to would be a Brewmaster monk all the way down the line in Mr. Pandaria, because you'll be gaining combo points and spending them on survivability or damage. Kinda like building chi as a monk and then spending it on survivability or damage. Luckily, if you play a rogue because tanking isn't your thing, which come on, that's why most people play rogues, they play a rogue basically because they want to do massive damage and nothing else. Well, you'll still be fine because some of these runes for DPS are actually insane. Let's get stuck in with the hand runes. So first up, we've got Main Gauche, if I'm even pronouncing that right. And this is going to be the first one of your tank runes, because what it does is instantly strike with your offhand weapon for normal offhand weapon damage and increases your chance to parry by 10% for 10 seconds, and this awards a combo point. It also does benefit from all talents and effects that trigger from or modify Sinister Strike, such as the first tier in combat, reducing the energy cost of Sinister Strike by 5. Now, it costs 35 energy, so you're going to be able to bring it down to 30 by putting 2 points into this talent. Now, the interesting thing is you're going to have to use it quite cleverly because it's got a 20-second cooldown, but we know the uptime is only 10 seconds. So whilst it's probably very tempting to use this on cooldown, you're going to want to line it up and make sure that you're making maximum use of that 10% parry. Next up, we've got an old fan favourite, which everyone who's played further than vanilla will know, Mutilate. So what Mutilate does is it instantly attacks with both weapons for 100% damage, plus an additional X amount with each weapon. Damage is increased by 20% against poison targets, and this awards 2 combo points. Mutilate does benefit from all talents and effects that trigger from or modify backstab unless otherwise specified. So this could be like the second tier, which is improved backstab in combat, where it increases the critical strike chance of your backstab by 10%. Obviously, you can put 3 points in that, taking it up to 30%. It's also worth noting this is not the TBC version of Mutilate, where you actually have to be behind the target. This does look like it's got no positioning requirement, which is obviously a very good thing, because getting all the benefits from backstab and using this while you're leveling and not having to worry about being behind is obviously a good thing. I do want to touch on a couple of things about Mutilate and a later rune, which I'll just say it now. It's in Venom, and obviously it's going to play very similar to the normal Wrath playstyle of Assassination, where you're mutilating as a combo builder, you're spending within Venom. There's one little issue I've got with it, and hopefully we get some clarification around it. So if you're wondering what I'm thinking about, stick around and you'll find out. On glove runes, you're quite spoiled as a rogue because you've got 5 different choices, and the next one's Saber Slash, which viciously slashes an enemy for 130% weapon damage and causes a target to bleed for X amount of damage every 2 seconds for 12 seconds, and this does stack 3 times. Saber Slash again benefits from any talent and effect that triggers from or modifies Sinister Strike. And if you're extremely observant and you're looking at this thinking, hang on Scott, you've got this wrong. I've been using the talent calculator and making all my rune setups and theory crafting how I'm going to be playing my rogue. Well, yeah, actually, you're right, because this has changed. So Saber Slash, as you can see in the latest data mining, has actually gone from 55 energy to 45 energy. What I was going to say in this video, which is literally irrelevant now, was that due to it being quite expensive and even having improved Sinister Strike, it's still going to cost 50 energy. You will probably be using it just to maintain the bleed damage. So once you've got it stacked, you would then go to using Sinister Strike until you're ready to refresh the stack of the bleed. Well, now you're actually bringing it down to 40 energy with improved Sinister Strike. It is literally just your combo builder. Next up will be a quick one because it's pretty much Shadow Step, but also with an attack thrown in for free. So we've got Shadow Strike, where you teleport behind the target and strike, causing 150% weapon damage to the target. you must be stealthed, and it awards 1 combo point. Not a lot to say here. It is basically your way of getting Shadow Step. I'd probably rather Shadow Step, though, rather than this, you know, so you could at least Shadow Step Sap, Shadow Step Cheap Shot, Shadow Step, you know, use it a little bit more intelligently than it actually just doing an initial attack sort of baked into the teleport. But still, it's pretty cool. And there's no doubt this is going to be absolutely amazing for PvP because it's got no cooldown. And as many times as a rogue that you will run away to break combat so you can get back into stealth. So being able to use this quite frequently probably is going to feel pretty great, especially in places like Ashenvale PvP. And then finally we've got Shiv. So instantly attack with your offhand weapon to deal normal offhand weapon damage with a 100% chance to apply the poison from your offhand weapon to the target. Slower weapons require more energy and it awards 1 combo point. Shiv's great and it's an ability that we're all very familiar with if we've played a rogue. And it's good for utility. So if you was in charge of, let's say, putting mind-numbing poison on a boss or on an ad or whatever, then having Shiv to make sure that you can get it on when you need it on would be great. But would you really want to sacrifice any of the other abilities that you get from runes just for Shiv? I feel like Shiv's in the wrong place, if I'm honest with you, because there's just far too much competition for anyone to seriously actually ever want to take this rune. Next up, we'll do the chest, and we've got Deadly Brew, which when you inflict any poison on a target, you also inflict deadly poison. Now, this will be huge if you're using Mutilate and Envenom, like I've already spoiled, is coming, because you can literally just run double instant poison, or you could go instant and a utility poison. Just a Flesh Wound is your tanking rune, and you don't really have any options with this one. If you want to tank as a rogue, you're going to have to use it, because you take 20% reduced physical damage while Blade Dance is active. Additionally, you have a 6% reduced chance to be critically hit with melee attacks, so you'll be crit immune. The threat generated by all your actions is massively increased, and your feint ability is replaced with Tease, which taunts the target. So this is when you come online as a rogue tank. Without this, you're just not going to be able to do it because you're not going to get the increased threat, as well as all the other things. Next up, we've got Quick Draw, where you draw your ranged weapon and fire a quick shot at an enemy, causing normal ranged weapon damage and reducing the target's movement speed by 50% for 6 seconds. This does award a combo point. Quick Draw also benefits from anything that triggers or modifies Sinister Strike. Again, this would definitely be more of a PvP rune, but probably will see its uses in some PvE encounters as well. These abilities are part of the Outlaw Rogue in retail, and have been part of the Outlaw Rogue for a long time. I didn't realise I had an audience while I was recording. But having some ranged abilities in general as a rogue in PvP is going to be absolutely amazing. Next up, we've got Slaughter from the Shadows, which reduces the energy cost of your backstab and ambush abilities by 20. This does not apply to Mutilate. So if you was going to be a dagger combat rogue, for example, this would take your backstab down to 40 energy, which is actually making it a lot more reasonable to use. Quite honestly, looking through them, I think if you're going Mutilate on your gloves, you're going to go Deadly Brew. If you're going to be a tank, you're going to use just a Flesh Wound. If you're going for a PvP rogue, you're going to go Quick Draw. And really anybody else would be going Slaughter from the Shadows, potentially, to then run a dagger combat spec. If you were swords combat spec, Deadly Brew would probably be the way to go. Remember, this is all speculation, so if there's like hundreds of you rogues all gathered round talking about what's potentially going to be BIS, I'm only speculating as well. And then finally, we've got the legs. Now, you've only got 3 choices on the legs because you had 5 on the gloves. We might as well start with the easiest one, which is Blade Dance. If you're a tank rogue, you have to use this. It's a finishing move that increases your parry chance, it lasts longer and grants more parry based on combo points spent. So you're going to get between 6% with 1 point up to 10% parry with 5 points, and it lasts 30 seconds with 5 points. Now, this is why it would be important with things like main gauche. That word really makes me laugh. Because you're probably going to want to open up with this to get the 10% parry straight away. This would really be the first ability you press, because until you start spending some combo points, you're getting no benefit from Blade Dance at all, of course. And really, you're going to want to be spending 5 combo points as soon as possible. And I think that's where things like Evasion will come in really useful, outside of just using it as when you know there's predictive big damage about to come in. Evasioning on the pull to enable yourself to be able to get a 5-point Blade Dance up could actually be really strong as well, especially if it's a really hard, fast hitting boss. Just popping it, knowing that you're safe for the whole 15 seconds to get everything up that you need going, because once you've actually got it up, then it's just like spinning plates. You're just going to be making sure that you don't let these things drop off. But the interesting thing about a rogue tank, when you look into the talents in combat, you can get 5% dodge from the first tier and then 5% parry from the second tier. So from runes and talents, and without taking any baseline parry into account, you're going to get 25% parry. Now, the 10% that you're going to get from your glove rune isn't going to be up all the time. It's only going to be up, well, half of the time, but you'll be keeping Blade Dance up 100% of the time. So the vast majority of the time, you're going to have quite quite a large amount of parry. And let's not forget, if you do go combat tank, you're also going to get riposte. So when you do parry, you're going to be able to disarm as well. And it's a very low energy cost, high damage dealing ability on only a 6-second cooldown. So yeah, I really like the look of rogue tanks. I still think they might struggle a little bit compared to the other tanks, but I don't want to jinx it. They could be mega strong. We may as well get Envenom out of the way because I've mentioned it before and I've said I've got a concern about it. So it's a finishing move that deals instant poison damage based on your deadly poison doses on the target. And then following the Envenom attack, you have a 75% increased frequency of applying instant poison for 1 second, plus an additional 1 second per combo point. And then it does a ton of damage based on attack power, so we know it's going to scale really well. So my concern, using Deadly Brew, Envenom, Mutilate, absolutely, like that's going to be the way to go if that's the playstyle that you want. The problem is, in vanilla, poisons have got charges. So just looking at instant poison at level 20, it's got 40 charges. How quick are you going to tear through those 40 charges when you use a big 5-point Envenom and you got 5 seconds of where you're just going to be slapping those poison charges into the boss? You're going to be literally reapplying poisons like every 30-40 seconds, which that'll be pretty frustrating. So I'm hoping Blizzard have thought about that and you rogues actually see a bit of a quality life change there where they use poisons from, you know, Wrath, like we get them now, where you just put it on your weapon and it lasts X amount of time rather than X amount of charges. But overall, having Envenom's great, but then that just leaves us to the last leg room, which is a bit lackluster unless you're going to be PvPing. It's a ranged finishing move that causes damage per combo point increased by attack power and stuns the target. So it's from a 1.1 second stun up to a 5.5 second stun, and it shares a cooldown with Kidney Shot. Now, it's got a 20-second cooldown, but it is on a 20-yard range, so in PvP, having someone trying to kite you when you're using Shadow Strike to teleport behind them, Quick Draw to be able to still build combo points when they're trying to run away from you, and then locking them down with Between the Eyes, is going to make Rogue a lot of fun. I personally am going to have a Rogue for PvP. The tanking on a Rogue don't interest me, don't get me wrong. The Shaman tanking really interests me, but for some reason, the Rogue one is not really ignited my interest enough for me to want to do one, but I really want a rogue for like Ashen Val PvP. I think it's going to be mega fun having those ranged abilities, ranged stuns, teleports to the target. Like, it's going to be pretty insane. The Priest, the staple healer on any vanilla server that everyone laughs at if they're not a dwarf. And why is that? Fear Ward. While in later expansions every priest has Fear Ward and it's used regularly, in vanilla it's only dwarves that get it. Season of Discovery looks likely to change that though, as in a recent interview with the devs they said there will be discoveries in the form of shrines and religions which could allow priests to swap their racial ability. Now this would be a game changer, because if you can be something like a human priest where you benefit from the extra spirit but also pick up Fear Ward at later levels, you're going to be laughing. Starting with the gloves, because I do believe that this is probably going to be one of the first ones you pick up. Circle of Healing is going to be the first option, and to be fair, we're probably all familiar with that spell. Circle of Healing has actually had its range increase massively. Originally at BlizzCon, it would heal all of the target players' party members within 15 yards of the target. Now that's been put up to 40 yards. Not only that, it's even got a better healing coefficient now, but the downside is the cost has gone from 21% base mana up to 28% base mana. But still, for you healers, Circle of Healing is going to be absolutely amazing, and it's going to be fun to use in both dungeons and raids. Next up, for Shadow Priests, or just anyone wanting to do some damage really, we've got Mind Sear, which causes an explosion of shadow magic around the enemy target. It does shadow damage every 1 second for 5 seconds to all enemies within 10 yards around the target. Now, the only one thing that I think is a bit of a shame here is that we got the poor man's version of Mind Sear. So we've got the version that you'd have in Wrath of the Lich King, where it has to be targeted on an enemy. So that enemy that you're targeting will take no damage from Mind Sear, just all the enemies around it. What would have been nice to see is the Cataclysm version, where actually you can cast it on a friendly target. So if a tank runs in, you could cast it on the tank, and it's going to hit every mob equally. Not a big deal, just a minor little complaint. If your favourite spec is a Shadow Priest and you want to play Season of Discovery, you're going to have an AoE now, which still is absolutely amazing. Next up, again, not an unfamiliar spell, but Penance. Launches a volley of Holy Light at a target, causing holy damage to an enemy or healing to an ally instantly and every 1 second for 2 seconds. It is actually one of my favourite looking spells that a priest has ever had. It does look like it's going to be on a 12-second cooldown, and it's got a 16% base mana cost. So again, while in Wrath you want to just use this literally on cooldown, you've also got a lot of intellect to go along with it to enable you to use it on cooldown. I think you're going to have to use this quite intelligently. And the final option is Shadow Word Death, and this is the point where I'm going to talk about my concern. So firstly, Shadow Word Death is a word of dark binding that inflicts shadow damage to the target. If a target is not killed by Shadow Word Death, the caster takes damage equal to the damage inflicted upon the target. So I'm guessing if you've played any version of World of Warcraft that isn't vanilla and you've played a Shadow Priest, you'll be familiar with what Shadow Word Death is. But just onto my concern while we're on this ability. As we work through all of these runes, be it gloves, legs, or chest, none of them seem to have anything that's going to aid a Shadow Priest's mana regen. Now, we know there's things like Seal of the Martyrdom, which a Paladin may be using, which does grant mana to the party, but the Shadow Priest hasn't got anything to actually be sort of self-sufficient. The reason I wanted to talk about this when it comes to Shadow Word Death is what they could have done is actually incorporated a talent from Cataclysm called Masochism. Now, what Masochism actually does is gives you mana when you deal damage to yourself with Shadow Word Death. So whilst it's sort of meant to be an execute ability, you could also use it to get mana back. That is just a thought. They're probably not going to change it because we're so close to release now. But I think Agrand or Blizz in general, if you're watching, I think priests might need a little bit of help on the old mana side. But moving on to the chest. First up, we've got Serendipity, where healing with Flash Heal reduces the cast time of your next Lesser Heal, Greater Heal, or Prayer of Healing by 20% for 20 seconds, and this stacks 3 times. Now, it's interesting because what's been changed with Serendipity here in comparison to later expansions is they've also added Lesser Heal and Heal into the mix. Ordinarily, it's just Greater Heal and Prayer of Healing. Now, on the basis that it looks like it's only rune abilities that are going to have a base mana cost where you need to be careful when you're using them, the existing spells as of this moment in time when you're looking on Wowhead all have an actual mana cost, meaning you can downrank. Don't get me wrong, they could go along the lines of making everything a base mana cost by the time it actually launches, but as it looks at the moment, you could downrank Flash Heal as an example. So you could pump out really quick, fast rank 1 Flash Heals for minimal mana, to then directly afterwards pump out a really fast Prayer of Healing. Or if the tank was in trouble, obviously it would be a Greater Heal. But you could try and be really mana efficient by using low rank Flash Heals to then give you a quicker, higher ranked heal or higher ranked lesser heal, whatever way round, just to keep a constant stream of healing on the tank. Next up, we've got Strength of Soul. Now, Strength of Soul was actually a talent that was added in Cataclysm where your lesser heal, greater heal, and flash heal reduce the remaining duration of the weakened soul effect on the target that you've healed. So as an example, the point of this would be to put a shield on the tank. You would then spam some heals or lesser heals into it to get rid of that weakened soul effect, and as soon as the shield drops, boom, you're renewing it with another one. The interesting thing that they've done with Strength of Soul, which only works if you've got this rune, the target of the power word shield will gain rage from taking damage despite the damage being absorbed, which is great. But the other interesting part for paladins is when you've got Righteous Fury on, it will trigger from direct damage absorbed by your power word shield as if it was a heal. So actually, having a bubble on you is just going to increase your threat. There's not really much to say there. I don't see this being that powerful. I mean, I probably, if I was healing, I would prefer Serendipity, but it's nice that it's there as an option. Next up, you've got Twisted Faith. Now, Twisted Faith is just basically the same as the Wrath of the Lich King talent, but minus the extra spell damage from Spirit. In Wrath of the Lich King, it does give spell damage based on Spirit, but here it is just a flat 20% extra damage with your Mind Flay and Mind Blast to targets affected by your Shadow Word Pain. Now, on the basis, Mind Flay and Mind Blast are going to be your 2 most damaging spells, giving them both 20% extra damage. It's kind of a no-brainer, even when we look at the very last rune, which we haven't covered yet, but I think Twisted Faith is going to be almost just a must-have as a Shadow Priest, as long as you're not Ohm. But the last one is Void Plague, which afflicts the target with a disease that causes X amount of shadow damage over 18 seconds. Now, you're probably thinking, well, this is basically just Devouring Plague. Well, yes and no. Devouring Plague obviously does exist in the game, even though it's only for undead priests. Like I said earlier, later on in the phase, or even in a future phase, you might be able to get Devouring Plague no matter what race priest you are. And even though Devouring Plague's on a 3-minute cooldown, how amazing would it be having Shadow Word Pain up, Devouring Plague, and Void Plague? That's just going to be a nasty amount of dot damage, which you can then just top off with some Mind Blast and Mind Flays, and things are probably just going to die. I think overall, the choice of chest runes is pretty basic depending on what spec you're playing. Strength of Soul, I'm sure, will have a place, but I think most healers would just naturally run Serendipity. And I think fight-dependent, Twisted Faith and Void Plague can be mixed in and out. And the reason I say fight-dependent is Void Plague could be used on heavy movement fights, whereas Twisted Faith would be used on fights where you don't need to move as much. Because remember, if you're putting Void Plague up and then you've got to move, you're getting the full benefit of that rune. If you're having to move when you're using Twisted Faith, well, you're just losing damage. And then finally, bringing us to the leg runes. I'm going to leave Homunculi till last just because that is really interesting. So let's start with Shared Pain. So Shared Pain basically allows your Shadow Word Pain to afflict up to 2 additional nearby targets within 15 yards. Pretty basic. You put Shadow Word Pain on a target, and if there is any other targets nearby, they're also going to get Shadow Word Pain on them, up to a maximum of 2 extra targets. Now, this is great, but it depends on how hard some of this stuff's going to be. So this could be an absolute nightmare if it hits CC targets. So if a mage has got a target polymorph because it heals and you don't want to deal with it until later on in the fight, and you've got a Shadow Priest using their Shadow Word Pain and then it's putting it on the sheep, that'd be a nightmare. As long as these things can't hit targets that are in CC, then there's no issue. And looking at the way all these classes look like they're going to play, everyone's getting AoE, everyone's getting cleave. There's probably not going to be that much CC going on anyway. But on a 3-target cleave boss, Shared Pain is going to be absolutely amazing, as is it going to be amazing in dungeons. Next up, we've got Prayer of Mending, another old familiar spell, where it places a spell on the target that heals them for X amount of healing the next time they take damage or receive healing. When the heal occurs, Prayer of Mending jumps to a party or raid member within 20 yards. And this jumps up to 5 times and lasts 30 seconds after each jump. This spell can only be placed on 1 target at a time. If you're a real die-hard priest, did you notice the one thing that makes this absolutely amazing? Assuming it goes live like this, it has been changed to be the next time they take damage or receive healing. So currently, a really irritating thing about Prayer of Mending is when it jumps to someone and they take no damage. So you have no control over being able to force that Prayer of Mending off of them. You need to just put a new Prayer of Mending out. Now, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, this spell costs 15% base mana, so you want to make sure this does jump 5 times. So the fact that if it jumps to a range, let's say it jumps to your mage and your mage is taking no damage, you can quickly throw a lesser heal or a really cheap heal onto them to force that Prayer of Mending to jump again. Now that's huge, and I truly believe that that is probably Blizzard really looking ahead and thinking, some of these healing spells are really good, but you're not going to be able to use them on cooldown like you would use them on cooldown in Wrath of the Lich King or in Cataclysm or in whatever. And I reckon they've added that little receive healing in there just to compensate for that. And just in case you're interested, I even checked the retail version of Prayer of Mending to see if it does the same thing, and it doesn't. In fact, I checked through every patch change that Prayer of Mending has ever seen and can't see anything where this has actually been a change in the past. So this is completely unique to Season of Discovery, assuming it goes live how it reads. Next up, a big complaint from me. Me complain? I know, never. Power Word Barrier. This is an absolutely amazing ability. It summons a holy barrier to protect all party members at the target location for 10 seconds, which reduces all damage taken by 25% and preventing damage from delaying spellcasting. Now, not only does this ability look amazing, it is an incredibly powerful raid cooldown, and it's one that you want to feel powerful using. Now, my complaint with it is how it reads. It reads as protecting party members at the location. Now, you're probably thinking, well, that probably means raid as well. Going back to Prayer of Mending, that actually reads as party or raid members, and there's loads of other abilities that read as party or raid. This sounds like it's party only. Now, my complaint about it is this should be raid wide, because there's a big bubble that everybody can stand in and they know they're going to take reduced damage. This could get really confusing if a priest puts it down and you think, you're going to go and stand in it and you're going to take reduced damage, but it's actually only 5 people, a single party out of, let's say, 10 of you, if you're doing BFD, that are going to actually benefit from it. So this could force people to stack that don't really need to be stacked. They're wasting time running over to the barrier when they're not actually in the same party as the priest. So unless this is trying to encourage having multiple priests, in which case it's such a powerful raid cooldown that you'd almost want one priest in each group, or one priest in most groups, to be able to power barrier their entire group. I don't know. I just feel like it should be raid wide. Let me know what you think in the comments, because I think that's going to be a really clunky one to have as party only when it's visible to everyone. And then finally, the one that I wanted to finish on because it's a brand new ability. While we've seen ones like it, kind of, we've not seen them work quite in this way. What this ability does is it breaks off splinters of your soul to animate 3 miniature copies of yourself that attempt to attack your current target with a mace, sword, and axe, reducing the attack speed, attack power, and armor, respectively, of any target they hit. I'm really intrigued to see how this works, because reducing attack speed would be Thunderclap, reducing attack power would be, let's say, Demo Roar, and armor would, of course, be Sunder Armor. Now, this is quite a long cooldown because it's on a 2-minute cooldown. So every 2 minutes, you're going to be able to use this. But if you've already got a warrior in the group keeping up his Sunders, keeping up his Thunderclap, and his Demo Shout, then you're only really benefiting from the damage that the 3 little splinters are doing, which we don't know what the damage is going to look like yet. So what I'm actually hoping is this is a raid-wide damage increase. I know it's only really going to affect the melee because it's going to further reduce the armor of the bosses, but it's also going to be used as a defensive cooldown because your tanks are not going to be getting slapped as hard or as fast, but it would rely on its stacking with existing debuffs. So I'm hoping that thought has been taken by Blizzard, and it's basically a weaker version of Demo Shout, Thunderclap, and Sunder Armor. So it's not going to be as powerful as the ones that the Warrior does, but it will stack with them. Now, outside of my concerns about mana for Shadow Priests, I think they're looking in a really good place. And there's been sensible changes to these new abilities that have been added, such as the Prayer of Mending change, that I think is going to get Priests off to a really good start. The Paladin. So the rune slots that are going to be available at level 25 are going to be for chest, legs, and gloves. Up until 25, you can get 4 for the chest as a Paladin. First one's going to be Seal of Martyrdom. Seal of the Martyrdom's changed since the state it was in during BlizzCon, because now it's actually only single target. Before it was hitting 3 targets, and you was losing health equal to 2% of the damage inflicted. Now it's only hitting 1 target, but you're losing health equal to 10% of the damage inflicted. The only good note about this really is that while the seal's active, your party members within 40 yards each gain mana now equal to 10% of the damage you take from the seal. During BlizzCon, this was actually only 2%. Keeping along the same lines as when you're actually swinging the weapon, unleashing the seal's energy will now instantly cause 70% weapon damage, but it will cause 10% of the damage to you. That seal is not new. Of course, it's changed a little bit. And the thing I love about this straight away is, you probably noticed it lasts 30 seconds. So it's the original sort of form of seals where you're constantly refreshing them, like vanilla. So it's not like you're getting Seal of the Martyrdom and it lasts 10 minutes or it lasts 30 minutes. We're talking 30 seconds at a time. It's also great at the cost of you needing to be healed a little bit more because you're taking damage. You're giving everyone else mana back. The next chest rune is Divine Storm, which is an instant weapon attack causing 110% of weapon damage up to 4 enemies within 8 yards. The Divine Storm heals up to 3 party or raid members, totaling 25% of the damage caused. I think we all know what Divine Storm does, so not really a lot to talk about there. It is literally just Divine Storm, but how cool is that? Horn of Lordaeron is another chest rune. The Paladin blows the Horn of Lordaeron, which increases total strength and agility of all party members within 30 yards by 17. This lasts 2 minutes and is exclusive with Blessing of Might. So Horn of Lordaeron, basically Horn of Winter, but for Paladins. Very cool. Aegis is another chest rune, which increases your block value by 30%, and damaging melee and ranged attacks have a 10% chance to increase your chance to block by 30%. This lasts 10 seconds of 5 blocks. Effect is not cumulative with Redoubt. So what's interesting about this is obviously Redoubt is the first 5 points that you would put into the protection talent tree. If you was Retribution, this does mean that you could use this chest rune, maybe just to fill the spot of a tank in a 5-man or something, without needing to worry about respecking. You know, these runes are going to be able to be used in quite funky ways. Then we've got 5 different leg runes. First one is Divine Sacrifice, which many of us know and use very regularly as Paladins in Wrath, where 30% of all damage taken by party members within 30 yards is redirected to the Paladin for 10 seconds. Damage which reduces the Paladin below 20% health will break the effect and grant the Paladin 10% increased damage and healing done over 10 seconds. Now that's an interesting change. Actually being able to use it as not only a raid-wide defensive cooldown to reduce damage, but then you also get the benefit of getting 10% extra damage and healing from it once it breaks. Now the thing about Divine Sacrifice is it can't be used if you're under the effect of Blessing of Protection, Divine Shield, or Divine Protection, and it prevents you being targeted by those abilities while it's active. So Blizzard really do want you to actually take the damage instead of being able to bubble and desack like we definitely would have used it as. The next leg rune really does make me laugh. Inspiration Exemplar. Your inspiring presence periodically dispels fear and sleep effects on nearby party members. Now you've got to remember they've gone down the route of trying to keep it as vanilla as possible, you know, in terms of lore and everything that's going on. So you have only got Paladins on the Alliance and Shamans on the Horde still. You basically are, as a Paladin now, you can use this leg rune and become a tremor totem. If it's a fight where you don't need a tremor totem, you don't need that pulsing, you know, fear and sleep effect to be dispelled, you don't use it. And you can change your runes at any time out of combat. So I really like that even on a fight-by-fight basis, what rune you use is going to massively affect the rest of your party, or the rest of your group, or the rest of your raid, and you're going to do it on a fight-by-fight basis. Avenger's Shield is a classic, so hurls a holy shield at the enemy, dealing 165 to 197 holy damage, dazing them, and jump into additional nearby enemies. And it affects 3 total targets. That's cool. I like it. And obviously, as somebody who's played a lot of prop Paladin, it'd have been nice if it had the silence effect on it as well, which maybe we'll see at a later date, but at the moment it is just a daze, which that's fine, but having the silence effect attached to it as well would be banging. The next leg enchant is Exorcist. So Exorcism can now be cast on any target and has a 100% increased critical strike chance against undead and demons. So for those of you that maybe haven't really played Wrath, Exorcism is a core part of the rotation, really. You use it with Art of War procs, and it can be used on anything. So really, this leg rune is just turning it into the Wrath of the Lich King Exorcism, which, yeah, pretty cool. Rebuke is another great one. Interrupts spellcasting and prevents any spell in that school from being cast for 2 seconds. You will get Rebuke in Cataclysm, and you get it as all specs. So you'd be able to use Holy, Prot, Ret, doesn't matter. You'd be able to have an interrupt in all 3 specs. So this is great because you can have an interrupt in all 3 specs. It's going to come down to what you're having to sacrifice from the legs. But again, if you was to think of a Holy Paladin as an example, if it's a fight where you need the pulse in fear resist, you'll use that leg enchant. If there's another fight maybe where you're going to be up close and personal with a boss, healing still, you could be part of an interrupt rotation if, let's say, your group just lacks people with interrupts, or lacks people that would need to use a rune to get an interrupt. Interesting. And the final 3 are glove runes. So the first one is an easy one, Beacon of Light. In recent adjustments leading up to launch, Beacon of Light has actually had its radius changed from 60 yards to 40 yards now, which is not too much of a big deal. We all know what Beacon of Light is. The target becomes a beacon to all members of your party or raid. Any heals you cast on a party or raid member will heal the Beacon of Light for 100%, and only one target can be a Beacon of Light at a time. As somebody who heals ICC, well, heals everything every single week, this is great. Having this in vanilla is going to feel so funky, to the point where, as a Holy Paladin, there's no other rune you're going to get. I can't imagine. Even if there's other runes that you unlock by level 60 on gloves, you're not going to use anything else, are you? Beacon of Light all the way. Crusader Strike's one that we're all going to be very familiar with if we've played Ret Paladins in more than just vanilla and TBC. It's an instant strike that causes 75% weapon damage and regenerates 2% of your max mana. It was recently changed because it was only on a 4-second cooldown. It's now been put up to a 6-second cooldown. Probably not going to use anything other than that for Ret. And then finally, Hand of Reckoning taunts the target to attack you, but has no effect if the target is already attacking you. And while you know this ability, the threat bonus from Righteous Fury is increased to 80%, and Righteous Fury causes you to gain mana when healed by others equal to 25% of the amount healed. So they've basically put in spiritual attunement, so they've brought all the prop Paladin sort of things that make it great in Wrath of the Lich King and onwards, and have baked it all into this one rune. Because additionally, while Righteous Fury is active, damage which takes you below 35% health is reduced by 20%. And that, again, in Wrath of the Lich King is a talent that's a lot further down the tree. And that particular glove rune, as a prop paladin, you wouldn't use anything else, would you? So it looks like the glove runes are almost not optional, and I would say that you're probably going to learn that very early. These are the introductory ones that are going to go on your gloves because they sort of make or break your spec. To keep you waiting too long to get these obviously would be ridiculous, because you're not going to tank without Hand of Reckoning, you're not going to want to heal without Beacon of Light, even though you would, and as a Ret, you're going to want Crusader Strike. So my guess would be you'll get these in the starting zone very, very early. But that's all the Paladin runes that we know about up until level 25, and I think it's going to be pretty sick. It is so good to see mages get a lot of love in Season of Discovery, because since 2019, they've just been terrible. From really, really slow levelers in vanilla, having a nightmare during TBC when it comes to making gold because of how squishy they are, and then just barely doing any damage in Wrath of the Lich King, so just struggling to get raid spots overall. So it's really nice to see that they can broaden their horizons a little bit in Season of Discovery, because not only are they going to be able to absolutely pump on damage meters, they're also going to be able to heal as well. All sarcasm aside, I do genuinely think that in the right hands, a healing mage, or a regen mage as I'm referring to it, is going to be absolutely nuts. Starting with the glove runes, you've got an old familiar arcane spell called Arcane Blast, where you blast the target with energy, dealing 190 to 221 arcane damage. Each time you cast Arcane Blast, the damage and healing of all other arcane spells is increased by 15%, and the mana cost of Arcane Blast is also increased by 175%. This effect stacks up to 4 times and lasts 6 seconds, or until any other arcane damage or healing spell is cast. So the traditional way to play Arcane when you've got Arcane Blast is to have a burst phase and to have a regen phase. Your burst phase will be just going ham with all your cooldowns and just pressing Arcane Blast as much as your mana pool will allow, because you know you're going to have either Kate or your mana gem or mana potion or whatever to fall back on to get your mana back up. At which point you're then doing sort of a regen phase where you're going Arcane Blast, maybe then missiles. Your mana pool is going to dictate how many Arcane Blasts you can get out without your mana going too low, and then you're waiting for your burst phase again. There is another little side thing to note here with Arcane Blast, because it does say other arcane spells. So that would lead me to believe that actually Arcane Blast doesn't benefit from the buff on subsequent Arcane Blast casts, but it also does increase healing spells, not only arcane spells. So actually getting max stacks of your Arcane Blast buff and then using regen is probably going to be insane. Now, the interesting thing is how this is going to synergize with the healing runes, though, which we're going to get onto very soon. Another old familiar spell for frost mages is Ice Lance, where it deals a small amount of damage, only being 23 to 27 frost damage, but it causes triple damage against frozen targets. Not really a lot to say there. It's going to be a frost or a PvP talent, but it is very good, and it does start to hit very hard, obviously, as you start to get plus frost damage or plus spell damage. Living Bomb for the fire mages, where the target becomes a living bomb, taking 142 fire damage over 12 seconds, and at the end of that 12 seconds, or if the spell is dispelled, the target explodes, dealing 72 fire damage to all enemies nearby. Again, it's a staple move for fire mages, but more so when you're sort of using it to actually get an extra chance at a crit to get instant pyroblast procs. That could come in the future in a different rune, possibly. But either way, it's a great addition to the Fire Mage toolkit. Now, Rewind Time is the final one, and this is for you healing mages. This ain't going to make a great deal of sense until we get into the other runes, so I'd rather just come back to this one. So let's go straight onto the chest. First of all, you've got Burnout, which increases your spell crit chance with all spells by 15%, but your non-periodic spell critical strikes now have an additional mana cost of 1% of your base mana. Quite honestly, 15% crit for an extra 1% base mana on each spell, it's not that bad. In fact, it's a bloody good trade-off. Next up, you've got Enlightenment, where you deal 10% more damage while you have more than 70% mana, but while below 30% mana, 10% of your mana regen continues while casting. And this actually sort of plays into the whole burst phase and regen phase when you're arcane, because when you're above 70% mana, you'll be absolutely pumping, you're getting that extra damage, but then when you drop below 30% and you start doing your preservation phase, we'll call it, where you're just trying to get your mana back up and you're taking it quite easy, then you're going to get that extra regen kick in, so could be really good for Arcane. Fingers of Frost is a great one, which many Frost mages from future expansions will know about. It gives your chill effects a 15% chance to grant you the Fingers of Frost effect, which treats your next 2 spells as if the targets were frozen, and this lasts 15 seconds. Now, just looking at things like Shatter in the Frost Tree, you're going to get extra crit chance if something's frozen. So if your Fingers of the Frost is treating them like they're frozen, you're obviously going to get the benefits from talents like this. And of course, it will synergize really well with Ice Lance, because Ice Lance does triple damage if they're a frozen target. The big shame, though, is early on, you're only going to be able to get far enough down to put 1 point into Shatter, so whether the rune's worth it or not, I guess we'll find out. And now, finally, before we go back onto the glove rune, because now it will start to make more sense. This is your main healing mage ability. It's called Regeneration. Hence why I called it the Regen Mage. Now, Regeneration has actually gone through a couple of little changes as well. So now, after using the spell, you'll actually gain something called Tangled Causality. This lasts 5 minutes, and it reduces your fire and frost spell damage done by 50%, and it also prevents the use of Ice Block. So this is to make sure that actually you are using arcane spells as a healer. Because what people would have been doing is just absolutely trucking into bosses with fireballs, for example, and then when something needs healing, they're chucking an arcane missiles. The temporal beacon effect has also changed, because originally it was doing 100% of all arcane damage was then converted to healing. Now it's only 40%. So for any retail enjoyers or just future expansion enjoyers, it is very, very, very similar, almost exactly the same as Atonement for priests. So you're going to be wanting to get Temporal Beacon on people, then you're going to be bursting with arcane damage to heal them. But you can also do direct heals in the form of a sort of 3-second channel using regeneration. But ultimately what you're wanting to do is control the fight and know who's going to be taking damage. So if it's a heavy tank fight, you're not going to want Temporal Beacon on loads of people. You're just going to want it on the tank. If it's a 2-tank fight and they're both taking sort of reliable, steady damage, you'll want Beacon on both of them, so you're dividing the healing between the two. I actually think it's going to be quite a sort of skillful healer to play, because you really need to understand what's going on in the fight and when you want maximum temporal beacons on as many people as possible, or you just want it on 1 or 2 people, or maybe even just 1. So I'm really happy with the way that the healing mage looks like it's going to play out. So what's interesting is when we go back to the glove runes. Now, rewind time has actually had its cooldown reduced from 1 minute to 30 seconds now, so you can use it twice as often. This will definitely make rewind time a lot more worthwhile using. I still don't think many people are going to use it over Arcane Blast. Your current target with your temporal beacon instantly heals all damage taken over the last 5 seconds. It is ineffective on targets that didn't have a temporal beacon 5 seconds ago. So this would be great for tanks. We're going to be able to literally more or less heal someone from who was just about to die to completely full health, which is really good, but it is only 1 target. My issue with this is I would say Arcane Blast is going to be the way to go, because we know how regeneration works, where it is based on arcane damage. The rewind time's great as a big cooldown to top someone off extremely fast, but then you are relying on things like arcane missiles and maybe arcane explosion, but we're going to say pretty much arcane missiles. So I almost feel like in the early game, especially in phase 1 up to 25, Arcane Blast is going to be an absolute must. But still, rewind time, really cool ability, and I do look forward to playing around with it. Now for the leg runes, we've got Arcane Surge, which is a 2-minute cooldown, and it unleashes all of your remaining mana in a surge of energy focused at the target. And this deals an absolute truck ton of damage. It is all arcane damage, so it will synergize well with your regeneration, and it's increased by up to 300% based on your mana remaining. And then afterwards, your normal mana regeneration is activated and increased by 300% for 8 seconds. So you're going to have this massive big nuke on the target and use, well, as much of your mana as you've got left, and then you'll get a big amount of regen for the next 8 seconds. It is a 2-minute cooldown, which is quite interesting. This could be used by both DPS and healers, but only healers if you don't need mass regen. So your other healing ability you can get from runes is exactly the same as regen, but now it's mass regen. So it heals all of the target player's party members within 15 yards of the target for 262 over 3 seconds, and applies temporal beacon to each target for 15 seconds. The secondary part of this ability is exactly the same as regeneration. So now any arcane damage you do is it's gonna split that damage evenly amongst those 5 people as healing. Now the thing is, you're not always gonna need mass regeneration. There'll be fights where mass regeneration will be absolutely amazing. But then there's gonna be other cases where actually you only need it on a couple of people. You know, let's say you're doing a 5-man like Dead Mines or something like that. You're not going to need regeneration on the entire party, because they're not all going to be taking damage. Most of the time, you'll be keeping it on the tank. Maybe someone else starts taking a bit of damage, so then you do the regeneration channel on that person. Now you've got a tank and one other person with temporal beacon on, and you're just going to nuke the boss or nuke the ad, whatever you're doing. Mass regeneration will be a lot more useful in raids, no doubt, but even then, it's going to be raid bosses where specifically lots of people are taking damage. Arcane Surge would probably be a risky one to replace it as a healer, because you are then going to have a small period where you're completely even though you're going to then get 8 seconds afterwards of really, really good regen. We'll have to see how that plays out, because at the moment, I'm not sure I would ever want to get rid of all of my mana in one go, and then someone needs a quick heal, and I'm having to wait for regen. I don't know how that will quite work out. Next up, we've got Icy Veins, which again, we're probably very familiar with. It hastens your spellcasting, increasing spellcasting speed by 20%, and reduces the pushback suffered from damage and attacks while casting by 100%. It lasts 20 seconds, and it's on a 3-minute cooldown. Again, pretty much any spec, whether you're Frost, Fire, or Arcane, can make use of this, definitely. And it would be a nice throughput cooldown to use if you didn't need mass regeneration and you was healing. But obviously, it's a great cooldown to use if you're Frost and you're pumping out those Frost bolts, or you're Fire, pumping out those Fire bolts. It's just a 3-minute cooldown. Not really a lot else to say. And then finally, we've got Living Flame, which summons a Spellfire flame that moves toward the target, leaving a trail of Spellfire. This trail deals 42 Spellfire damage every second to nearby enemies, and it lasts 20 seconds. Now, Spellfire damage is actually classified as Fire and Arcane, so it's very likely that actually the Arcane damage portion of this, so really all the damage that it does, should actually heal your beacon targets as well. Now, this has a 1-minute cooldown, and the best thing I could really compare it to is Flame Orb that that mages will get in Cataclysm, where it just fires an orb that slowly moves towards the target, does damage to everyone on the way. It's, you know, it seems like that's sort of the route they've gone down, but this is just a little bit better because the fire stays on the floor, and hopefully tanks respect that and stand things in the fire so you get more damage. As a fire mage, really your options are fairly limited because you're either going for Icy Veins for a nice cooldown, or you're going for Living Flame where, yes, it's on a cooldown, but it's still a lot shorter of a cooldown and actually does damage. Overall, Mage has just got some amazing abilities. Over the years, Hunters have had a lot of ups and downs, but generally have remained a pretty good class to play throughout all of the expansions. From being absolutely stacked early on in TBC due to easy access of set bonuses, to even getting some love during Wrath of the Lich King Classic where they was given Trap Launcher early. If you like having a pet, there is just no better class to play. Sure, there's other classes like Warlocks that have got pets, but it's just not the same as a Hunter. As someone who raids quite a lot in Wrath of the Lich King as a Hunter, some of the changes that I've seen on Season of Discovery for Hunters has actually taken me by surprise. Overall, in Season of Discovery, before we get into the runes though, they look like they're in a really good place. If you're a fan of Beast Mastery, where actually your pet is doing the majority of the damage and you're just looking after him, Beast Mastery gets some pretty insane runes. If you want to go Marksman and you want to ditch your pet to do extra damage, then you've got that option as well. And even though in Survival there are some pretty good talents for actually doing damage at range, Season of Discovery is bringing the Melee Hunter. So the Survival tree is probably going to be the place to go if you want to be a Melee Hunter, even though there is actually good reason to go BM, and we'll get into that during the video. Let's get into the runes, and I'll give you a little bit of a breakdown on some little bits that have changed since the demo at BlizzCon. I truly believe that glove runes are going to be one of the first that you get, so let's start there. First of all, you've got Beast Mastery, where your pet's damage and health are increased by 30%, and its focus regeneration by 80%. In addition, your pet's growl now also taunts the target to attack it for 3 seconds. Now that is actually a crazy amount of extra damage and health for what are already pretty overpowered pets, particularly at low level. We know in vanilla pets don't scale particularly well, but actually when you're leveling, Hunter pets that are just fine. And if you put that 30% extra damage on top of picking up Unleash Fury in the talents, where you're going to get a further 20% damage, and there's also another rune that we're going to talk about soon that further increases your pet damage, I think Hunter pets are going to be absolutely slapping. Another interesting thing with Hunters is actually in the data mined information, it is showing something saying Hunter pet scaling. So it does actually look like the pets will be pretty relevant because they'll be scaling off of the Hunter's stats in some way. But if you don't really care too much about your pet doing the damage, then you've got Carve. Now, Carve is a sweeping attack that strikes all enemies in front of you for 50% weapon damage. So this is the first of the Melee Hunter abilities. It's nice that it's a full-on cleave in front of you, so a nice AoE ability. And I think it's probably a good time to mention a couple of little things that were picked up during the data mining earlier on this month that go against what we saw at the demo at BlizzCon. So basically, every Hunter that I saw play at BlizzCon all for some reason instantly went for the Melee Hunter option. And it's because it's new, I totally get it. But I think Blizzard very quickly saw how weak it was even during those short demos. Because what they've actually gone ahead and done, assuming this all makes it into live, is the Raptor Strike cooldown has been cut in half. So ordinarily it's 6 seconds, but now it's going to be 3 seconds. And that's going to be an important ability when we get to a rune very, very soon. And also, traps can now be used in combat. And not only that, the tooltip actually shows a 40-yard range. This was not the case at BlizzCon. Traps could not be used in combat. But now as a Melee Hunter, up close and personal with the boss or with the trash, being able to carve, drop a trap. And then obviously there's some other abilities that are going to come from runes which we haven't actually looked at yet. Immolation Trap very well could be acting like their very own trap launcher for hunters that want to play at ranged. Or they could have a 40-yard range because actually there will be a rune that comes in later, maybe on shoulders or on your cloak or something like that, that actually gives you trap launcher. So I wouldn't get too excited in a moment, even though it's got that range on it. I still think that might be paired with another rune to enable it to be trap launched. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see about that, but I do truly think that the actual change to the combat traps is around the melee hunter not doing enough damage. And then for you general DPS that want to be doing all the pumping themselves at range, we've got Chimera Shot, where you do 125% weapon damage, refreshing the current sting on your target and trigger an effect. If it's Serpent Sting, it instantly deals 40% of the damage done by your Serpent Sting. If it's Viper Sting, you're instantly going to restore mana equal to 60% of the total amount drained by your Viper Sting. If it's Scorpid Sting, you're going to be able to do a 10-second disarm, and this can't occur more than once a minute. So you've got some options there. Obviously, it's a great way to be able to get some mana back. It's a great way just to do extra damage because you're going to have Serpent Sting on the boss or on the trash most of the time, especially when paired with another rune that we're going to talk about soon. This is what I actually do like about the Hunter. There's some runes that I don't like, and I wouldn't have gone down the melee route if I'm completely honest, but a lot of these runes do synergize really well. And in PvP, having the disarming Chimera Shot is absolutely amazing. And finally, if you play Wrath of the Lich King as a hunter, you know Explosive Shot has been the bread and butter of the survival hunter pretty much for the entire expansion. You fire an explosive charge into the enemy target, dealing X amount of damage, and it's fire damage by the way, and the charge will blast the target every second for an additional 2 seconds. Now the cooldown's shared with Arcane Shot, which fine. This is missing one key thing. The thing that makes Explosive Shot extremely fun to use is lock and load. So I'm really hoping that one of the future runes, maybe when we get to level 40 or even level 50, is actually going to be lock and load. And the lock and load rune could interact with all of these, not just Explosive Shot. I think Explosive Shot feels great with lock and load. Until we've got that, don't know. That's the glove runes anyway, and overall there is a little something for everyone. So let's move on to the chest runes. Now, if you don't know, there was so much noise being made about the fact that Alliance are going to have Wind Fury from Cats, they're going to have Blessing of Kings from Paladins, and Blizzard are listening, and they're already making changes before the game is even going out, which is amazing to see. Raptor Strike having its cooldown reduced, traps being used at range potentially and being able to be used in combat, and then Aspect of the Lion being added. There is one thing that I don't like, and I'm not 100% sure on myself yet, but it looks like Expose Weakness, which was this rune, has actually been removed and replaced with Aspect of the Lion. Now, I'm sure there's a good reason for this, mainly because the amount of agility that you're going to have early on probably ain't going to make Expose Weakness too powerful to be worth using, and it might be brought in as a rune at a later level bracket. Aspect of the Lion is Blizzard's way of giving the Horde Blessing of Kings. So the Hunter takes on the Aspect of the Lion, increasing total stats by 10% for all nearby allies, and increasing total stats for the Hunter by an additional 10%. Of course, only one aspect can be used at a time, and you'd be using this in place of Aspect of the Hawk. But you're literally just going to be giving Blessing of Kings to everybody around you without ever even needing to buff. And on top of that, you're going to get that extra 10% stats yourself as well. Overall, really good. I would have liked to have seen it not being an aspect. Maybe not even seen it on a hunter. It could have come from anywhere. I feel like me personally as a hunter, I'd rather be using Aspect of the Hawk, because you get things like improved Aspect of the Hawk, where you have a chance at increasing your ranged attack speed. So no actual ranged hunter is ever going to want to use this. So really, you are only limiting yourself to melee hunters bringing this, because actually the other abilities here for melee hunters, not particularly good, not really worth using. So you will just use Aspect of the Lion. We either have a melee hunter or we don't have kings, because no ranged hunter is going to want to use this. Just a minor complaint. Next up would be Cobra Strikes though, where your critical hits with shot abilities cause your pets next to special attacks to critically hit. This has got some amazing synergy, so I don't want to talk about this too much, but BM hunters, you're going to want this. And it will become clearer when we get onto the leg runes, but this will be your go-to chest rune if you're going to play a BM hunter. Lone Wolf is absolutely amazing, and I've got to be honest, this is the one rune that makes me want to play hunter in Season of Discovery. I'm not a big fan of pets. I know some of you probably love having a pet as a hunter, but the first time I really enjoyed hunter was as soon as I could get rid of the pet back in original retail, and when Lone Wolf was first introduced. And what Lone Wolf does is it increases your damage by 15% with all attacks while you do not have an active pet. Now, it was 25%, but it's very recently gone through a little bit of a nerf. So it looks like when it goes live, it's going to be going live with a 15% increased damage while that pet is not active. But this doesn't mean that you can't use a pet still. You've got to remember, you can change these runes on the fly, boss by boss basis. As long as you're out of combat, you'll change runes. So let's think about the next one being Master Marksman, where it increases your critical strike chance by 5% and reduces the mana cost of all your shot abilities by 25%. As a ranged hunter, you could switch between these two on a fight-by-fight basis. If it's a fight where your pet is constantly getting AoE'd and hit by stuff, get rid of the pet and just nuke the boss. If it's one where it's quite pet friendly and there's not that much AoE going around, you could take Master Marksman for better mana to obviously keep pumping more. You could even take Cobra Strikes, which obviously will just get your pet doing even more damage. I still think really for a ranged hunter, you're between Lone Wolf and Master Marksman, and you would switch it up on a fight-by-fight basis. But they're the chest runes, and overall, I don't see a lot of options. As I say, Cobra Strikes really is for BM, Lone Wolf, Master Marksman for if you want to be a ranged hunter, and Aspect of the Lion, unfortunately, if you're a melee hunter, this is what you're going to have to use. But luckily, you haven't really got many other options anyway. And then finally, onto the legs. Now, the legs have some amazing abilities. Flanking Strike is for your melee hunters, where you and your pet deal simultaneous instant 100% melee damage. Afterwards, your Mongoose Bite and Raptor Strike deal 10% increased damage for 10 seconds, and this stacks 3 times. Raptor Strike has a 20% chance to reset the cooldown on Flanking Strike. Now, this is important because if we go back to where I was talking about Raptor Strike having its cooldown cut in half, this is the reason why. Because the more times you can press Raptor Strike, the more chances you're going to have to be able to press Flanking Strike more. And this is also why I said going down in BM as a melee hunter could be quite beneficial, because you're going to get Unleashed Fury, which is going to make your pet do more damage when you're using Flanking Strike. And I do honestly believe as a melee hunter that your pet is going to be doing a sizable amount of your damage overall. But looking at if we was to go for a melee hunter build, you're going to have Aspect of the Lion, Carve, and Flanking Strike. Carve is going to be your filler that you use when you can't Raptor Strike because it's on cooldown. Flanking Strike would be your number 1 prio. As soon as it is ready, you press it straight away, and you're just hoping every time you press Raptor Strike, it's going to reset. Now, you're probably wondering why I didn't mention Mongoose Bite in there and I'm fixating on Raptor Strike. Well, that's because Mongoose Bite is a counter-attack, so you have to physically dodge an attack before this becomes active. I would like to see a rune further down the line where, I don't know, this has a chance on Carve or it has a chance on Flanking Strike to allow it to be used no matter what. Because it is going to be a melee ability that you got sat there, and the vast majority of the time in PvE when you're in a dungeon or a raid, you're not going to be able to use it. So I do think there needs to be a bit of thought put in there to allow Mongoose Bite to be used sort of rotationally or as a proc. A little bit like for Warriors in Cataclysm where Overpower can be used. But overall, Flanking Strike's going to be great for you melee hunters. I hope you enjoy it. Kill Command is next, and this is nothing new. We've used Kill Command, and it's normally something you macro into your other abilities and just forget about it. Firstly, what it does and why I think this synergizes really well in the level 25 bracket. It gives the command to kill, increasing your pet's damage done from special attacks by 60% for 30 seconds. Each special attack done by the pet reduces the damage bonus by 20%. Now again, if we think about the extra 20% damage from Unleashed Fury and Beast Mastery, and we go back to the chest rune for Cobra Strikes where when you critically hit, it causes your pet's next 2 special attacks to critically hit, you would want to Kill Command after you've got a proc from your Cobra Strike, so you know the next 2 special attacks are going to crit on your pet. Those 2 crits are going to do additional damage, on top of the 30% extra damage that your pet's getting from Beast Mastery as well, means your pet's special abilities are about to absolutely truck someone. So I feel like these Beast Mastery related runes and talents all synergize together really, really well. We've just got 2 left now. We've got Serpent Spread, which again is a great talent that's been brought forward from Cataclysm, where basically all enemies hit by your multi-shot are also going to get 6 seconds worth of your Serpent Sting. So as a hunter, now imagine that you are getting Trap Launcher and your explosive trap actually has got a 40-yard range like the tooltip shows, and you're using multi-shot to put Serpent Sting on everything, you're going to be pumping. There's not really a lot else to say about this. It is just really nice. And again, it could synergize particularly well with Chimera Shot, because when you do Chimera Shot, it's going to refresh the current sting on your target, which even though it's only a 6-second Serpent Sting you're getting from Serpent Spread, if you Chimera Shot into one of these targets, it will go to a max duration Serpent Sting. So that's pretty good. Sniper training is not quite as powerful as it was when we first saw it at BlizzCon, because originally it was actually increasing your critical strike chance by 30% if you'd not moved for the last 6 seconds. However, now it's only 10%. I do think 10% is a little bit more like what it should be, because even in the hunter-specific video that I put out a couple of weeks ago, even I thought 30% was far too high. It still makes it a very good rune to use, though. See, I think the hunter is in a really good place, because even if you don't play a hunter main, you can very quickly look at these and know exactly when you're going to use each one. And the fact that if you want to be a melee hunter, you have 0 choice between runes, or maybe 1. You might have 1 choice of a rune, because technically with a 3-second Raptor Strike now, you could drop Carve and take Beast Mastery, so your pet's actually going to start doing a lot more damage. But that's 1 less melee ability you can press, so I don't know. And finally, the Shapeshifting Druid. The first rune is Sunfire, which burns the enemy for 55 to 65 nature damage and then an additional 110 over 12 seconds. In addition, while in bear form, cat form or dire bear form, your Moonfire is replaced with Sunfire Bear, Sunfire Cat, and the spell benefits from and triggers all effects associated with Moonfire. So that's really cool when you're like kiting, or even potentially you need to go in bear for a second if you're leveling as a balanced druid. That's pretty cool, but obviously we're not unfamiliar with Sunfire. You know, we've seen Sunfire, in many versions of the game. You're going to get it in vanilla as a boomy. Because you would use it as a boomy because, let's face it, Lacerate for your gloves lacerates the enemy target, making them bleed for 42 damage over 15 seconds, plus 20% weapon damage per existing application of Lacerate on the target, and this causes a high amount of threat, and it stacks 5 times. Again, we're not unfamiliar with Lacerate, but as a tanking druid, you would assume Lacerate on your gloves is going to be the one that you pick. Whereas Wild Growth does exactly what Wild Growth does in all the other games, where it will do a party-wide hot over 7 seconds, and the amount healed is applied quickly at first and slows down as Wild Growth reaches its full duration. Now, Wild Growth, since putting the original Druid video out, has actually changed. It's now been increased to 40 yards, and it's got a better coefficient in terms of healing output. The cost of it has gone up by 5% base mana though, taking it up to 28% now. There's your Resto Druid gloves. And finally for Feral DPS, you're going to get Mangle. So Mangle the target for 160% normal damage and causes the target to take 30% additional damage from bleed effects and shred for 1 minute. This ability benefits from and triggers all effects associated with Claw and Maul. So anywhere in talents where it reduces the energy cost of Claw or increases the damage of Maul, Mangle is also going to benefit from it as well. You'll notice this when we look through all of the classes. As I say, so far we've only done Paladin and now Druid, but the gloves seem to be the early rune that you're probably going to pick up in the starting zone. Moving on to the chest, the first one is Survival of the Fittest. This reduces the chance you'll be critically hit by melee attacks by 6% and reduces all damage taken by 10%. Damage taken reduced by an additional 10% while in bear form or dire bear form. So this is an interesting one because it has actually got uses outside of just being in bear form. So outside of just being a tank, this can be useful. But obviously, it does make you crit immune, so essentially as any spec, even if you was a boomy, let's say you was going down the balanced talent tree, you could slot this onto your chest, essentially going bear form and tank, and you'll be uncrittable. Next up on the chest is Living Seed. So when you critically heal your target with any healing spell, you plant a Living Seed on the target for 30% of the amount healed. This seed will bloom when the target is next attacked. It seems fairly obvious that that would be for the healers. There's not really a lot to say there. Now, this one is bloody amazing. Wild Strikes. While you're in cat form, bear form, or dire bear form, party members within 20 yards gain increased combat ferocity. Each melee hit has a 20% chance of granting the attacker an extra attack with 20% additional attack power. No effect if the party member is already benefiting from Wind Fury Totem. I spoke about this in the Paladin video, so this is purely because you're going to have Shamans on the Horde, you're going to have Paladins on the Alliance, so this is how the Alliance can get Wind Fury. I would have naturally assumed it would have been a rune that went on a Paladin, because you'd have the Shaman abilities, on the Paladin, Paladins on the Shaman, but I actually find it really fitting on a Feral Druid. I think that's really cool. Unfortunately, it's going to be one of those that is far more beneficial for the Alliance, as you would imagine. On the Horde, you're probably going to get a free chest rune, essentially, because as long as you've got a Shaman with you, you might not need to use this, whereas I think most Alliance Druids will almost be expected to be using this. But luckily, the only other one that you'll be able to get up until 25 is Fury of the Storm Rage, which reduces the mana cost of Wrath by 100%, and each time you deal damage with Wrath, you have a 12% chance your next cast of Healing Touch within 15 seconds to become instant. Now, you probably see that as quite a strange one, because you're like, that is actually a healing talent for later on in the expansion. But actually, as a boomy, or just leveling as balance, having no mana cost on Wrath, because mana, don't know if it's going to be an issue in Season of Discovery, but it has been an issue in Vanilla, especially for boomies. That's quite cool. You can help out by throwing the odd healing touch around when you get it proc, and your Wrath is free. So yes, you're still going to spend mana on Starfire and stuff, but you can always press something, no matter even if you're room. Those chests are really weird runes, because they do definitely cater themselves just to each individual spec, and there's not a lot to play with. But moving on to the legs. Legs appear to be where you're going to get a nice big ability, so I would expect these ones to actually come a little bit later. But for the boomy, you're going to get Star Surge. You launch Surging Stellar Energies that cause 57 to 70 arcane damage, and Star Surge benefits from and triggers most talents and effects that trigger or benefit from Wrath and Starfire. So again, this is going to be things that increase your crit damage of Starfire and Wrath, increases your damage in general of Starfire and Wrath. This will also scale as you improve Starfire and Wrath with talents. Hope that makes sense. As Resto, you'd be trying to get hold of Life Bloom, which reduces the global cooldown of your Rejuve and Life Bloom abilities by half a second, and you gain the Life Bloom ability. So that means you haven't got to worry about getting haste capped, which obviously you can't anyway, so it's kind of irrelevant, but obviously getting the haste cap in Wrath is an important thing to bring your GCD down to 1 second so you can blanket more people with more hots. You get that from a rune. But then you also do get Life Bloom, which heals the target for 45 over 7 seconds, and when Life Bloom completes its duration or is dispelled, the target instantly heals for 91 and the Druid regains half the cost of the spell, and this effect can stack up to 3 times. You can see a lot of melee weaving Resto Druids because of clear casting in the Boomy tree. Actually, as Feral, this is quite a decision to be made here, even though it probably looks pretty obvious. Skull Bash. You charge to a target within 13 yards and bash the target's skull, interrupting spellcasting and preventing any spell in that skull from being cast for 2 seconds. It's also worth noting that with Skull Bash, it does actually share a cooldown now with Feral Charge. We all know Skull Bash comes in Kata. It's nice being a Feral with an interrupt, but my choice is going to be taken away from me really because Savage Roar is the final leg rune, where this is a finishing move that increases physical damage done by 30% while in cat form, and it lasts longer per combo point. So 1 point is 14 seconds, all the way up to 5 points, which is 34 seconds. We're all familiar with Savage Roar, it's not something new. It's that buff that you just have to maintain, and it's interesting they use the Wrath of the Lich King version. So if you're not aware, the Wrath of the Lich King version increases all damage by 30%. So bleeds, everything will benefit from it. Whereas when you go into Cataclysm, Savage Roar actually only affects auto attack damage. So we got the better version of it, I would say. I'm saying we, like I'm going to be a Feral. I'm not going to be a Feral to my second character. I'm going to be Paladin first. But yeah, a really interesting version of Savage Roar to get, I think. So as a Druid, having Wind Fury, Savage Roar, Mangle, being able to pump bleeds and Shred actually doing good damage because you're keeping Mangle up, it's going to be a really, really interesting season to play a Feral Druid. Oh, any Druid. Sorry, any Druid. I shouldn't fixate on Feral just because I'm biased, but yeah. Like and subscribe. See you on the next one.